Welcome back to the Breaking Ice podcast. My name is Josh Ferguson. I have the chance to sit down with Al Pace today, and we kind of have a similar background in a lot of ways. But I thought it would be cool to kind of hear about his life, like where you grew up and whatnot, how you discovered the North, and then decided to spend so much time up here. So yeah, let's jump in.
Well, that is a long journey, and you're right. It began in Ontario. I grew up in London, Ontario as a kid. My first experience with rivers was the Thames River in London.
Oh yeah,
literally floating down inner tubes. You know,
I know the river.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Medway Creek and the Thames River, and then of course, like most kids in Ontario, most families, we had a family cottage, and it was on Quagama Lake, which is just east of Dorset.
Okay,
and just underneath Algonquin Park. And wouldn't you know, I grew up in a canoe tripping family, and I have 5 brothers and sisters. My mom and dad were canoe trippers, and just simple pleasures. My dad was a passionate organizer of trips, winter planning, making food lists, getting the old woods canvas tents and equipment, and he actually purchased the first chestnut cedar strip canoe from Bill Swift at Algonquin Outfitters on Oxtongue Lake.
That's kind of cool.
1961. He bought the canoe for $199, which was a lot of money back then. And we still have that canoe hanging in our lodge here in North.
Is that the one above the table?
Yeah. So
that's kind of a cool little piece of history, actually.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. My dad took me on my first canoe trip when I was 7 years old. And it was just a 3-day trip into Raven Lake, one portage. Yeah. And we all turned turtle with Duluth packs on our back, because they were dragging on the ground and usually longer than our legs would hold. So
how old were you at this point?
7 years old.
Okay.
My first canoe trip. And at Quagama Lake, where we spent 6 weeks as a family every summer, we had 2 canoes there, and I was an early riser. And
you just got up early in the mornings?
By the time I was about 10, I could launch the canoe by myself, and I could single along the shore, maybe 10 feet from shore. And I literally knew every rock and stump and log along about a mile of shore. I'd come back by about 7 a.m. And then I'd split up a little bit of kindling, because our cottage was really more like a camp. And we cooked 3 meals a day on an open fire. And my job was to split kindling for the fire. My dad got me a little axe when I was about 10 years old, and I used it to split kindling. Yeah.
That's cool. So your father was clearly super into like this and kind of imparting those values on you, and clearly it runs in your blood. But tell me about your parents, kind of their personalities, who they were, and what brought them into that kind of recreation.
Well, I did not fully understand this until my mom's memorial service after she passed away.
Okay.
She grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and her father was a diplomat, and he spent some time in Chicago, and my mom went to a girls' camp as a young girl, and she went on a canoe trip. There's a bunch of tripping camps in Wisconsin, and she went to one of these camps, and she had one of these epic experiences where the girls were on a trip. They paddled across a lake. They were in a storm. They got to shore, but all the girls were wet. And she wrote this letter to my uncle, and as a young girl, and it basically said, "Dear Dick, we went on a canoe trip. There was a big storm. We paddled so hard, and we got to shore. We were all wet, but we didn't care. It was better because of the storm." And, I thought it was my dad who planted the seeds of adventure.
Oh, interesting.
But in 1961, my dad, who was a medical doctor and an intellectual and highly educated, my mom said to my dad, Bill Pace, "Bill, take me to the wilderness." And I think it was that memory of Wisconsin that was calling. My dad had That was the first. Maybe she had done a couple others. I'm not sure, but it was that trip that was transformative for my mother. And I think we've all paddlers have all had that transformative introduction into canoeing
Mm-hmm.
at some point where there's a memory that is so galvanized
Mm-hmm.
that it sets you on a certain path.
Yeah.
And it's just, I didn't fully understand where the source of inspiration came from. I thought it was from my dad, but it was actually my mom
Nice.
who inspired my dad to go up to Oxtongue River, Algonquin Outfitters, buy that canoe. And after that, they went on canoe trips.
And they adventured independently before they had children.
They did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, actually, in 1961, they had 2 kids at the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And then, so by 7-year-olds, you're portaging, you're paddling, you're doing the whole thing. And what, did you ever go to a camp yourself, or was it always kind of just personal adventures with your family?
You know, it's interesting. I did go to Camp Amick on Canoe Lake for 1
Oh,
year.
yeah, okay.
For 1 year. It was a well-known boys camp. And there's a girls camp, Wapameo, which is across Canoe Lake. My brothers had gone to Amick. And, you know, I found the trips there were very underwhelming. I had already been doing 10 and 12-day trips with my dad. And suddenly at Amick, I was doing 3-day kind of weekend trips where you're just cooking hot dogs.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit underwhelming and disappointing. And so I really just spent the one summer, I guess 4 weeks at Camp Amick, and didn't have an active canoe or camp experience as you did yourself, for example. However, I was a student at Lakefield College School from grade 9 to 13, and Lakefield had a fledgling outdoor education program before outdoor education was even a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And Lakefield did it sort of ad hoc. The school did not have a gymnasium, did not have a pool. It had a lake, it had forest, it had trails, and it was close to the Kawarthas, close to Bancroft, and even Algonquin Park. And Thanksgiving weekend, typically when, you know, private school boys would go home for the weekend, all the kids went on canoe trips. And in Victoria Day weekend, same thing. Instead of going home for a 4-day long weekend, we would all go on canoe trips. So I really credit Lakefield for fueling my imagination with deeper possibilities of canoe tripping and experiencing that joy of adventure. And it was in my final year at Lakefield in 1977 that I was invited to go on a school trip, paddle the Coppermine River, which originates now in the Northwest Territories and ends in Nunavut. But back in the day, it was all within the Northwest Territories. And I was interested in early history explorers, Samuel Hearn, George Douglas, even Franklin spent time around the Coppermine. And my imagination, was always full of images of these early adventures. So to be on the Coppermine as an 18-year-old boy was one of those transformative moments that really charted me or set me on a path where I'm at today, where the north, the far north, really got deep into my bones, and it lured me back through my 20s. I had 3 chums that I canoed with on rivers like the Hanbury, the Thalon, the Kazan, the Devant. And then in the 80s, one of those fellows moved to Whitehorse, Yukon. And I spent my early part of the 80s paddling rivers in the Yukon territories. The first time I wasn't out on barren land rivers. Yeah. I was suddenly in the mountains.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
And
it's a big difference.
Dramatically different in terms of speed and skill development. And it wasn't until the year 2000 I did my first trip in the Sawtooth on the Mountain River.
Yeah. Well, for the listeners who don't know Ontario as well, there's a massive canoeing culture there. Yeah. And I think it's definitely the highest concentration of summer camps in Canada, and it might even be in North America. It's just, especially canoeing camps and whatnot, it's massive. Spend time on lakes. Yeah, there's so many lakes in Ontario,
and every cottage has at least one canoe.
Yeah,
and there were those regattas on the lake where we gunnel bobbed and we did 4 in a canoe and we did paddle with no paddles, just hands only. Canoes were a source of great inspiration,
Well, and I think the prevalence of lakes it's so much, like, it allows canoeing to be so accessible because they're not dangerous like rivers are.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So you can go around, mess around on a canoe on a lake, and if it flips, well, big whoop.
100%.
Especially on those small Ontario lakes. Like, it's not like a big
Yeah.
wind's going to kick up, or you're going to get blown across.
No.
Into nowhere. That's so cool. Yeah, my background is simple. I was living in Mexico. I'd come up and I'd go on a trip in Temagami, and my first trip was 10 years old, 10 days, and that was brutal homesickness.
Oh,
Oh yeah, that kind of a thing. And then I don't know what my dad was basically like, you got to at least go again.
Got to tough it out.
Yeah, like you got to do, like, you can't, like, after, you can't say you don't like it after once. Like, you have to try twice at least. So I went back on a 19-day trip the next year.
Whoa.
And that really galvanized it for me. I was like, this is sweet.
Do as an 11-year-old, that's a lot to ask.
Oh, no. Sorry. I was 12 on the first time.
Okay.
12 on a 10-day
13,
trip. So
yeah.
13 on a 19-day trip. But still, same kind of thing. Like,
well, and don't you find on a trip like that, it doesn't take long before you just lose track of time altogether?
I think it takes 3 days.
Yeah.
3 days to get into it. We, when I was directing in Temagami, people would get, like, we'd have schools call us and say, hey, can you take us on a 2-day trip? And we would just say no. Like, there's no point.
No point. No.
Because it's like, we need at least 5 to get through to the kids.
It's the same with adults.
Yeah, I'm sure.
A lot of our canoeing clients who ask us to do like a 5 or 7 day trip, we just say, it's such a monumental effort to come north from your environment, from Ontario or Manitoba or wherever, the US, and to get into the cadence of these beautiful river trips, to get your kit figured out, to really build a bit of community with the team members on the group. It takes 3 to 5 days.
Yeah. And
by about day 6, you're just hitting your stride.
Yeah.
And so, no, we don't offer a 5-day trip.
No.
There's no point.
There's no point.
Right.
It's a lot of effort for no fun in a lot of ways. On a personal trip, you could do 6 days, but something as big and as important as going out where you guys go, then it is it's definitely worth doing more time there. So so in your 20s, this is when you first discovered the sawtoo and
well, actually no, I would have been the year 2000. I would have been 40.
Okay, the 40 is when you got here. Okay.
Or was it when I was 30?
Sorry, it was in your 20s that you first went up north.
Went up to the Yukon, went up to the Northwest Territories.
Gotcha.
But did not come to Norma Wells until the year 2000.
Okay.
So I would have been 40. And we started Canoe North Adventures in the Yukon Territory. We were there for 10 years.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, honing our craft and building our small brand. It was my wife and I started.
And with a similar routine, you would return to Ontario in the winters?
Exactly. Actually, it was even less than that. We were also young parents, and so we would come up and run 2 trips or 3 trips.
Tell me about meeting Lynn.
Well, Lynn was a horseback rider.
Okay.
And
you're enough with those horses. Come on a canoe trip.
and Lynn's a little bit older. She's 9 years older than me. And she was running a art and craft business. She and her partner at the time made beautiful custom pine and oak furniture. And I was a studio artisan. I was a potter. And in the area that we lived, Caledon, Ontario, artists came together and formed guilds, and we hosted events and shows to sell our wares. And because Lynn's company, Robinson Hall, made beautiful furniture, it was an ideal place to profile my pottery, my plates and bowls and platters. And so that's how we first met. She had a partner, I had a partner, and we were sort of colleagues. And eventually we connected, and I got married to Lynn when I was 22. She was 30. And I was running a studio. It was my 5th year running a pottery studio. She then went back to school, did her MBA. She's a deep thinker. She's really an idea person. If I'm sort of the worker ant, she's really the intellectual, and has a tremendous imagination, a tremendous source of process, of ideas. And that is a great strength for her. And she actually became a river guide at age 40. And, we had to get her out of the barn and off a horse before we got her into a canoe. And she would tell you straight out, she dreaded the day of doing her first big northern trip. She believed she was going to be the weak one who was last over the portage, would be complaining. And, she would tell you it was like a dark cloud on the horizon. I've heard her tell this story many times. I can almost do it word for word. But, she got out there in the wild, and we were paddling on the South McMillan River in the Yukon Territory. And her only sister, Anne, had just passed away of breast cancer. And she found incredible peace on that river. And she also found an incredible comfort. And she became a very skilled paddler, like very quick. Like a real accelerated, I think that's her deep intellect, understanding, current.
She's an architect and analyst.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And she's interested, and she's also a pilot. So she understands lift and dynamics and low pressure and high pressure and Bernoulli's principle. She understands all this stuff, and it all helps her understand the movement of a canoe through moving water. And so she was a very quick study. And it was not long before she was leading her own trips as an all-women's group. I might be off with a group of guys. We did trips together. We did everything together. It wasn't until we came over to the Sahtu in the year 2000, and after 10 years in the Yukon, where there are 3 primary roads that allow you to get deep into the wilderness without a lot of cost. What was happening was the Yukon was becoming very successful at promoting backcountry expeditioning.
Independent backcountry expedition.
So there was a bit of traffic on those rivers. A lot of people coming from Europe, a lot of people coming from Germany, a lot of people coming from the US. And what our clients really wanted was more pristine and more remote. So in 2000, I came over to Norma Wells with a group of guys, the recommendation of a friend, and flew out to Willowhandle Lake with Warren Wright in the.
That was your first meeting of Warren?
In the Twin Otter,
yeah.
Absolutely. The Twin was still painted in honey air colors, black and yellow. And
was it? But the company had moved over already.
It had moved over.
Okay,
yeah, it was North Rideau.
Yeah,
and just had a fantastic experience on the Mountain River with these guys. And what I loved about the Mountain River and the Sahtu rivers is that it doesn't matter if you're paddling the western slope of a mountain range or the eastern slope. Water is consistent. It does the same thing, whether it's flowing east or flowing west. It was very reassuring. It meant that the skills that I had developed over 15 or 20 years were quite universal. And I did not feel intimidated. I mean, the Mountain River is our top whitewater trip to this day. I did not feel intimidated at all. I felt very comfortable there on that river. And it just, and of course we didn't see a soul. It brought back tremendous memories of the 1980s when I was paddling in the Barren Lands, where you could be out for 6 weeks and not see a single person. And this was the kind of wilderness experience that our clients were really pining for. And so the next year, my wife came up. We ran the Keel River, the Mountain River, and spent more time with Carolyn and Warren Wright. We learned that Warren grew up 20 minutes from where we live in Ontario, and that Carolyn, and that would be Shelburne, Ontario, and Carolyn grew up in Norwood, which is just outside Peterborough, which is where I went to school for 5 years. So there were these sort of, bizarre connections, degrees of separation.
Yeah.
And we found an air service operator who was very passionate about making sure we had everything we needed. And they had the critical aircraft. The Platus Porter, the Twin Otter can carry hard shell canoes. There was an outfitter in town where we could rent canoes for the first few years that we were here before we brought our own equipment into the wells. And so we really very quickly connected the dots and said, this is where we want to hang our hat. This is where our heart is falling in love with this wilderness. And Although we still have a storage unit in Whitehorse, Yukon, with a fleet of 8 canoes and a bunch of gear, we really, and we did run one trip a year in the Yukon for a number of years, just because of the interesting history there and Dawson
It's also
City.
a good intro, and it's a different product.
It is, and we found that a lot of our vintage canoers who were maybe at the verge of timing out and wanted one more really manageable, safe, historical, cultural sort of trip, the Yukon River from Pelly Crossing to Dawson was perfect. Just fit the bill perfectly. So,
and do you guys still run that?
We haven't for 2 years, and we probably won't do it again.
Okay.
Simply because we also recently received an outfitter's license to operate in the Detroit and in the Nahanni National Park, and
which is just it's just better.
It's just a bit more contained. It's just we can't do all things.
Yeah.
And I think one of the risks with any small business is spreading your resources a little bit too thin.
Yeah.
So our passion are these Mackenzie Mountains. And if we think about our Canoe North Adventures being a niche operator, we're specialists in the Mackenzie Mountains, from the Nahanni to the south, to the Mountain River to the north, and up to the Horton and Anderson and Coppermine River area. That's it. Those are sort of that barren land, far northern tundra river experience. Yeah. That's really where we're hanging our hat.
That's cool. Yeah, the landscape up here is crazy. Tell me a little bit about the kind of ethos behind your canoe tripping, and it's different from kind of an Ontario state of mind. And there's a lot of portaging and a lot of
100%.
You kind of have to be lighter than you guys travel and whatnot, and it's definitely a little bit more geared towards client relationships up here, just because you don't have as many portages and whatnot. But how did that kind of develop, and tell me how you kind of built your style over time?
Well, it is very different than Ontario canoe tripping, where portaging is just deep in your DNA, and you're doing almost as much time hauling gear as you are paddling canoes.
Or more.
That's the other thing that we loved about Sahtu rivers, is they flow and flow and flow and flow almost uninterrupted.
Mm-hmm.
And many of our rivers have no portages or one portage. And we have learned to travel a little bit heavy. Back in the day, weight was always an issue. And so dehydrated foods were the order of the day. And here, we're able to take coolers with frozen meats. We're able to take a small barrel full of vegetables, a small barrel full of apples and fruit. And this is unexpected for our guests, who generally come from a culture of less is more.
Mm-hmm.
And we've developed sort of a culture on our trips where more is manageable.
Mm-hmm.
So we take, for example, very good camp chairs. And many of our guests are over the age of 50. When you're over the age of 50, if you don't have a comfortable camp chair, you're just going to head to your tent and call it a day. But if you've got great camp chairs and you set them up in sort of a circle of chairs, we call it our mosh pit, you're going to create conversation.
Yeah.
You're going to inspire, really great conversation. And that's something that we care deeply about, is that connectivity. So typically our groups are 10 guests and 2 guides. So it's a big gang.
Mm-hmm.
6 canoes, we carry a lot of payload.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, our menu for 7 days is really exclusively fresh food.
Mm-hmm.
So eggs in the morning, sausages or bacon, cold meats for lunch and bread, chicken, pork, beef for dinner for 7 days, before we roll into more of like a stir fry pasta.
Stuff that you can dehydrate.
Yeah, exactly. And the more typical camp fare, where you might have like an oatmeal breakfast or a pancake breakfast.
Yeah.
So I would say
no one's complaining on day 8 about that.
We don't suffer. We don't suffer at all. But it did. There was a sea change shift in 1987. On one of my very first Yukon trip was on the Wolf River. I met this fellow Walter Brennan, who was a Newfie and a fabulous canoe tripper, and he'd been in the Yukon for some time. And on that trip, he took the time to bake fresh muffins in the morning, get up a little early, pick some berries, some currants, add them into the muffins. For morning break, there'd be some fresh fruit leathers, like, banana, strawberry, blueberry, something else, and all made by hand. And then in the afternoon, beef jerky with a little bit of Dijon mustard painted on it, which is, who is this guy? And these are delights. And when I first met him, the very first night on Wolf Lake, he was sitting in front of a Dutch oven and a campfire, cooking 6 Cornish hens in a 12-inch Dutch oven.
I was expecting guests.
No, I just about fell over. I immediately knew I liked this guy.
Yeah.
And I really needed to understand more about the quality of experience.
Well, you can really easily kind of get into a mindset of just like, oh, we're just going to push through and suffer. But that's the point.
Well, and in my 20s, that was our goal.
Yeah.
We were retracing historical roots of John Hornby's, Samuel Hearn, the Tyrrell brothers, some of these early explorers. But suddenly, we were canoe tripping with our partners. And it was much more about time well spent than necessarily getting to destination B and taking a little bit of wine, having a little sip of scotch at the end of the day, maybe a little bit of Bailey's in the coffee. These were experiences that we'd never considered because weight was such an issue for some of the long charter flights we were doing, and et cetera, et cetera. And just limited payload in say 4 canoes or 2 canoes and 4 people.
Yeah.
So in an instant in 1987, my understanding of what was possible changed.
Yeah.
And as we started to build Canoe North Adventures, we wanted to bring that kind of community and culture into the campfire, into the campsite, and really show people that we could have a quality experience. And without giving up as much as we might think.
Totally. Yeah. The contrast to my background is like we were working with kids. So like the point was to kind of push them
100%.
And the portages are a tool in that sense, right? Because it's something they don't believe they can do. And we, there was definitely this, like, it wasn't like suffer because, but it was like, don't be afraid of the suffering. But it doesn't make sense for your trips at all. It just doesn't.
No, and keep in mind, like our clients are
totally
age 50 and above, up to mid 70s. There are physical issues that we have to manage, and the great risk that we have is someone maybe trying to overachieve, who could injure themselves, carrying a pack or lifting a cooler pack. So what I like about our equipment is that everything has 2 handles.
Yeah.
And I'm 65 now, and I've had some shoulder surgery. And so if there's a heavy cooler, I'm just going to ask you to grab a handle. Let's dance together down to the canoe and we'll haul it down.
There's no harm. There's no point in becoming a liability on your trip.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that we really try to teach that that everything about our trips are teamwork, that there's no heroes. The guides and the guests intertwine into one. We're not shy to ask for help. In fact, we know that some outfitters, literally, they're more like catered trips where the guides do all the cooking, the guides do all the prep. Now, on our trips, the clients are part of the work teams who might do dinner or do dishes, and it rotates. So if you're doing dinner on day 1, you're doing dishes on day 2, and you're part of a 3-person team. You have fun. It's social. It means other people who aren't on dinner have time off. Go down the river, do some fishing, or have a swim, or whatever.
I think it also fosters that communal experience, right? Like you're all pitching in to make it happen,
100%,
as opposed to just being taken care of, which I think is a more valuable experience.
Yeah. Well, in the early days, like we would have all 10 of our guests just hovering around the canoe, all wanting to help. Well, that was ridiculous. We got lots of muscle power. So then we established these teams of 3, and we would naturally sort of split couples up so that they're interacting with new guests. And our trips are made up of 1s and 2s, 3s and 4s. It's not a group of 10 who all know each other. And
very unlikely. It's possible, but
they're
unlikely.
Strangers.
Yeah.
We have the occasional private group will approach us to design a custom trip and itinerary, and that's a separate thing. But most of our trips, we build the client group together.
Do you like interview people and kind of place them together where you think they'll jive?
We do.
Based on like personality, but also experience level?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, for example, each one of our, let's take the Mountain River, for example. It's a challenging whitewater river.
Mm-hmm.
You would not want to take 10 novice paddlers on the mountain. It would not be fair, it'd be irresponsible. So you need some solid stern paddlers.
Yeah.
You need a couple of very skilled bow paddlers. However, you could take 1 or 2 novice paddlers who are teachable, mobile, keen to learn.
Yeah.
They could paddle with one of the guides or a very experienced guest.
Yeah.
I would have no issue. And I have taken novice paddlers on the Mountain River, but it's been very well managed.
We always joked about how there was this particular skill set of being able to paddle whitewater with a completely incompetent child in your bow. Who would cross draw when you said draw or whatever, just do the opposite.
Yeah, we call that just goofy.
Yeah.
You say draw left, it's a cross bow right.
Like,
oh my gosh. Yeah. No, been there, done that. Yeah.
So we would do this thing. We would enroll kids in like a session, and we kind of had an idea of where kids would be on a trip. And if you were returning, you would like kind of climb the ladder. Right, so we had like a Viking. We called it the Viking trip, which is like the youngest kids, and then we had like a Macobe or Temagami River. There was usually like like a partner trip, the options depending on if somewhere was on fire or whatnot. Wolf Lake and the Sturgeon, and then the Des Moines or the Coulange, and then the Bay trip.
Sure.
So we would enroll like 60 kids in a session, and they'd all show up, and then we would mostly have an idea of where they were going. Some kids knew already, and then we would entertain them with support staff. They'd play a game.
Sure.
And all the trip staff, the kids didn't even know who their guides were. All the trip staff would go in a room, and we'd go with the director. Whoa. And we'd put all the kids' names on a wall.
Whoa.
And the kids who knew what trip they were going on, you put them down there, and then we go, okay, everyone been paying attention to the kids. Let's put them in where they need to be.
Throw some darts.
Well,
exactly.
And it was like, and it was interesting because people were like, we kind of grew up, like most of the guides grew up in that culture. So like we were kids ourselves, and then we transitioned into staff. So a lot of us had been coming to camp for at least 5 years to 10 years by this time we were like guiding or whatever, 7 years. And we'd be like, okay, like Stuart, who's interacted with Stuart, and we were encouraged to kind of mingle with all the kids, and it was very secretive which staff were leading which trips.
Oh my god.
And then we would list everyone down, and we go, and we're like, okay. And then we would, before dinner, or I don't exactly remember, but then we would gather all the kids, and then we would do this whole like thing where we reveal,
the big
call
reveal.
the trips up, and then you would go off with your group, and then you would have your group. But it was such a crazy thing. But then what's so cool about the model we were doing is like all the trips would leave at the same time from the island.
Whoa.
Like the next day, like one after another.
Gone.
Yeah. So 60 kids would come in, 6 trips would go out, 5 trips would go out, or whatever. And then the next day, like 3 days later, 40 kids would come in, and then we'd send out the youngest kids.
Well, it's interesting.
And then they'd all come back at the same time at the end.
I can't imagine. Absolute chaos.
Can you imagine the electricity in the air though? But like, think about that. Like 60 kids who had just
up.
And the difference between the energy at the beginning at the end is insane.
Oh,
yeah,
100%. Well, it's interesting in designing our groups. So, for example, at Canoe North Adventures, you can't sign up for one of our trips online. We want to have a conversation.
Do you kind of sign up for like flat water or whitewater kind of thing? And then
I think what we ask people to share is their paddling history. And if they've been on a canoe trip recently, we'd love to know where that was. And then we contact them, and either by phone or Zoom or in person. Yeah. And we really want to understand the kind of passion they're going to bring to one of our experiences. And if it's a single person or a couple or 2 brothers or an adult child with a parent, we've had lots of teenagers with a parent. We want to understand how is this group going to gel together, and the sort of energy level. And for example, if you had 10 intellectuals on the same trip, it would probably be pretty dysfunctional. So to have say 2 couples, mother-daughter, couple of brothers, a single guy, a bit of just a mashup.
Yeah.
It's amazing how well it works. I think we take a lot of care in crafting our teams. It's something we take a lot of pride in. We rarely have a misstep where there is a little bit of a dysfunction in a group, or say a difficult guest that needs a little bit of extra care. Sometimes we get fooled, but we have a great we have a great foundation of understanding of what it takes to build a team, and then also to match that team with the right guide team.
Oh yeah, that's really important too, because that was one thing that we took into consideration too, because staff would actually sign up to come work not knowing who they would be working with or what trip they'd be going on.
Exactly.
And then we do a similar kind of reveal for them, and they would learn 3 days before they went that they were doing the Des Moines, and then they would get their kids, and then they would leave. Like, it was such and but so much of the conversation was, is this group of kids the right pair for the leader group?
Well, exactly, and leadership can come in a lot of different forms. We have guides. We have about 16 guides in our ranks, and male and female. Some are more soft-spoken. Some are a bit more gregarious and outgoing. And all of our guides, especially when they collaborate with an assistant, just have such a beautiful style and comfort in the wilderness. And we trust them to bring individuality to their leadership strategies. And, we don't have sort of a cookie cutter or template for how to lead a canoe trip. There's a lot of different ways to run a canoe trip. What we care about is that it's a very inclusive environment on trip, that there's a real commitment to skill development. So one of the things that makes our company unique is we want all of our paddlers to become better paddlers.
Yeah.
It means they're safer in the water. Yeah. We have impeccable safety record.
There's another, that's part of the reason you're going on the trip.
Well, true. But also, if they become more confident and skilled paddlers, and let's say they've been on the Keel River. Yeah. The Mountain River would be the next natural step up.
It's a nice progression.
It's a nice progression, nice to give them a carrot to sort of, dangle. And so we have we developed sort of 8 foundational skills that, if our guides commit to teaching those skills throughout the course of the trip, all of our paddlers, even the experienced ones, will be just more comfortable in the water. And there are a lot of ways to paddle a canoe down these rivers, and we're not saying that our way is the absolute exclusive best way.
No, it's just one that you've formed.
It's a way that we have had a lot of success with in taking hundreds and hundreds of guests down these rivers safely and consistently and responsibly. And we're super proud of it. And what we're trying to do now, as Lynn and I are beginning to kind of sunset out of operations at Canoe North Adventure, and our son Taylor will be the new owner, we're looking at legacy. And my son says, "Dad, you're old school." And I said, "No, I'm proudly old school."
Well, yeah.
What we did back in the day was just organic and natural selection. We just learned what we needed to learn in order to stay safe on these rivers. We didn't have all the gadgetry, all the gear, all the dynamic paddles and canoes.
It wasn't commercialized in the same way then.
Not at all.
Yeah.
My first canoe trip on the Coppermine, I was wearing Greb Kodiak work boots. We were paddling in jeans in a Grumman canoe, kneeling on our PFDs, and paddling in hockey shirts. I mean, it was outrageous. However,
you should do it. You should run a vintage trip.
Oh, like a retro trip.
Yeah. Like, sign up. It's gonna suck, but it'll be awesome.
That's a brilliant idea. Have like tents that leak and stuff like that.
No, canvas tents.
Exactly. Don't touch the tents. So I just remember that we were so respectful of the remote areas that we were traveling back in those days. There was nobody coming. There were no sat phones. We didn't carry radios. We would literally tell the float plane guy, "Meet us at Beverly Lake in 30 days. We'll be there." Yeah. We had to be there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Nobody was coming to look for us.
No.
So that was kind of our legacy. And I think what we are aware of now, that if we want these 8 critical skills, for example, to continue to be taught at Canoe North Adventures, we need to modernize the language a little bit. So we're working with one of our guides who is an instructor to take those 8 critical skills and spin them into sort of current lingo and just jazz them up a little bit so they're a bit more spicy.
I think you just need a retro font and keep them the same.
I like that idea too. Yeah. In my heart, that's what I want to do. But in order to find middle ground and make sure that our guides are stoked to teach this stuff, that it doesn't sound old school.
Yeah.
And Lynn has been talking about legacy and legacy over 45 years of northern travel. For Lynn, traveling over 30 years in the far north, guiding, 50 plus trips. I've guided over 100 plus trips. This is a type of traditional knowledge that is just inspired through experience. It means you have paddled rivers in flood, in drought, in spring, in summer, in fall, with snow, with heat, with rain. You have seen rivers become nasty places, dangerous places where you've had to run to the high ground and wait. You've also seen rivers that are caring, that just take you in and provide such a great playground. And all of that knowledge, has incredible value to young guides who may want to sort of get up to speed a little more quickly, so they can just be more versatile as a guide. And we have that knowledge, and learning how to share that with our guides now from a mentoring perspective is really a great role that we could both play. And it's exciting to think about handing the torch.
Yeah, but like once you hand the torch, you're just not like absent from the company, wouldn't you?
No.
Like, you'd be like, like fixing some electrical in the background. And
well, it's funny. This summer, like this spring, I had shoulder surgery.
Yeah.
And so this summer was the first summer in my adult life that I was not paddling canoes or guiding canoe trips.
And how was that?
Well, I spent the whole summer at our lodge here at DOT Lake.
Yeah.
And I've got to tell you, I saw our operation from such a different perspective. I was able to meet all of our guide teams. I was able to help them launch all of their trips. It
actually blows my mind that you haven't done that yet.
It was incredible. No, it was totally transformative. I also saw the excitement, the anticipation pre-trip, and then the trip's launch. And then 12 days later, I saw these groups come back. We host a final night dinner at our base where there are poems and songs and tears and hugs and great conversation. And what I've learned about our lodge at DOT Lake is that it just inspires these moments of truth for people. People have waited their whole lives to do a trip like this.
Yeah.
There's not too many unhappy people who come to our lodge. They are either just about to launch or they have just had epic life experiences and memories. And when they come back to our lodge after a trip, they savor that memory for that special night together before they transition out and depart Norman Wells the next day. So
I also think the person who stays at the base carries a really important role, holding space and being that consistent person. Like if you show up with a certain crew and then you leave, it's another crew. There's this really kind of like weird detachment.
Well,
where you don't feel as connected to the place.
It's exactly what my guides told me, that they liked having me there.
I'm sure they did.
They appreciated me providing them, updates on water levels, on weather patterns. They could call in on the sat phone. I could give them a 3-day weather forecast, headwinds, whatever. They appreciated having my voice available to them. And it was way more interesting than I understood it to be. And as I say, I have such a different perspective on what we've created there in Norman Wells. And I was always proud of what we did there, but now I'm really thinking there's nothing like this place in the North.
So did you miss being on trip?
I would say so. Sure. But it's interesting when people were coming in, say, off the Horton River, or off the Keel River. And they were telling me about experiences at, say, the boat sucking boil, or at the char fishing pool. I could just put myself in that place visually. And I found the conversations to be so endearing and so rich with excitement. My son Taylor took an exploratory group on the Anderson River this year, and that's a river we've been looking at for a decade. And we took an alumni group. They were experienced. They were with me last year on the Horton River for 25 days. And a first descent down a river, there's always a little extra, adrenaline flowing.
You don't exactly know what to expect.
No, they found a fantastic and glorious river to paddle. They got close to a grizzly, moose, muskox, wolves, caught lots of fish, had incredible rapids. And I was so excited to be a cheerleader and to be a bystander and to hear about the experience. I didn't actually have to go on the trip myself. So it was a real interesting and different summer for me this year.
That's cool. That's really cool. We would, we had the Bay trip, which was like the capstone trip. There's the capstone trip. It was the pinnacle for the kids. You couldn't sign up for it. It was invite only. So you'd have to like prove yourself over the course of your career at camp, whether or not you were eligible to go on the trip, because it was challenging enough, difficult enough, and we would make the experience emotionally challenging in like a development sort of way. So you had to be mature enough to go on the trip. Sure. So there was like that kind of holistic goal as a person that you would have to develop to a certain point to go on the trip.
Was that like a 3 or 4 week trip?
No, it was 19. It was okay. It was like 20 days. It was one day more because they left a day early.
Yeah.
And they were also the role models for the rest of the kids. And they wouldn't sleep in a cabin. They would sleep in tents. And we had this kind of like, we thought that it was, instead of them having the most prestigious place to stay, they would give that to the younger kids and they would sleep in tents at base, right? It was like a sacrificial leadership kind of thing.
A little bit hardcore.
Yeah. And I like it. And also it's like, it's not about us. Like we're doing the hard thing, but it's not about us. It's about you. Right.
Very cool.
Anyways. So then they'd go on this trip and the leaders, it was the same kind of thing. Like you'd have to be, if you're chosen to lead the Bay trip, it's like, okay, like, seriously.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's huge. And also to be chosen to then assist someone because the leader got to choose their assistant, right, which is a different dynamic than all the other trips, right? Because you didn't get, as a leader, you would be paired. But on this trip, you get to choose.
Nice.
It was cool.
Nice.
Anyways. And you were talking about the first descent, you kind of like always have nerves. A lot of the people who led it, most of them had been down the river before, but they were like kids and participant when.
That's right.
So you have a really different perspective of a river when you were a participant than when you were a guide, right? You're really paying close attention as a guide.
Yeah. You're not just making stuff up.
Yeah. And then so I eventually did it as a kid, and then I did it as an assistant, and then I did it as a guide, and then I became a director. So then I was briefing people to go on the Bay trips. And it was funny. I would always say this thing because people would be nervous and they'd be like, well, like, how do I know where to go? And I just said, deal with the 100 feet in front of you.
Exactly.
You don't have to deal with that until you're through this.
It's actually not unlike any other river very well.
Yeah.
You still have to look down the 100 feet.
Yeah.
And look for changes in the river. Maybe there's been a slide. Maybe there's a log jam. Maybe there's been a rock fall. And so you don't assume anything.
No.
Ever. And so going down a river for the first time, I think what's important from a planning perspective is to allow yourself enough time to do a bit more scouting of rapids, to take your time to identify good campsites. And of course, Google Earth can help with that too.
Yeah, it's helpful.
And my son and Taylor's passionate about satellite imagery. And so he was very well prepared. But being in the moment and seeing some of the GoPro footage and recently a set of client photos, it's just a stunning new experience that we can offer our guests who maybe have paddled 2 or 3 of our rivers. And bringing them back to the Sawtooth is so important, and keeping their focus in these mountains or in the North Coast area. It's what we're very dedicated to.
You can imagine the kind of evacs we would deal with, because we would service about 400 or 500 kids a summer over the course of the summer.
That's just mind blowing.
Well, you know, staff team of 50, and then they'd go home, and then we would do another 6 weeks with a staff team of like 20 or 10 or something. So it was like a lot. But you were talking about your guides feeling comforted by having you on the other end of the phone throughout the whole summer.
Mhm.
We would call that the hive mind, because there was like 5 of us.
Right.
At base camp.
My God, that's stunning. I mean, we offer 15 trips per season, so 150 guests.
Well, yeah. So what was it? It would be like 50 trips a summer.
Whoa,
it was crazy.
It's mind blowing.
Yeah, it is. It really is mind blowing, and it was about up the upper echelon of what you could do in a summer without it being impersonal, right?
I would think so.
Yeah. Anyways, we call it the hive mind, and we had crazy experiences with evacuations. And before we had sat phones on every trip, you'd get a SOS spot.
Whoa.
Right. And then you'd be up at midnight going on with the first responders, and they're going, well, what's the matter? And we don't know. You got to go in there.
So we've never actually had an emergency evacuation.
That's awesome.
We've had one precautionary.
Kids are super spastic.
I guess that's true. Yeah. We had one precautionary evacuation some years ago. And just in case, a little health hiccup was happening, and that worked very smoothly. But we've been very fortunate. I think it's a product of knowing our clients extremely well, knowing our routes, our rivers extremely well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Being well prepared, and always planning itineraries where there is some wiggle room, where we're not pressed for time. And those rivers will take you to where you're going to go. If you're delayed because of poor weather for a day or two, you could easily make up that time. Get on the water an hour early, shorten up your lunch, paddle for an extra hour. You've just done an extra 20 kilometers.
And with clients, with older clients, you don't get to the end of a Portage Trail and like 4 of them climbed a tree.
No.
Yeah.
Quite true. The other thing is the long daylight hours of the summer.
Oh, that's true, actually.
So in Ontario, at
it's
7 o'clock, it's dark.
Yeah.
And you're talking flashlights, headlamps, and tripping over tent wires.
Well, and you get into this really toxic routine if you're not managing your time properly, where you get into camp late, then you're cooking in the dark, and then you get to bed, and then you wake up late, and then it's
the worst.
Well, you're just done. Unless you really reset, and a lot of young guides have difficulties with that because they're stressed about distance. But the 24-hour sunlight's a massive difference.
So, for example, it's not at all unusual if we're, say, paddling down the Keel River and we wake up to pissing rain.
Yeah.
We just tell the guests, stay in your tents.
Yeah.
We're going to wait till the rain stops.
We never do that.
Okay.
We just always get up.
Yeah. Well, no, but just and in the mountains, the rain will stop.
Yeah.
We might not have coffee till 10:30.
No, but whatever.
We might not break until 1 o'clock, and we'll just paddle till 6, have dinner at 8, still have them in bed at 10:30.
Yeah.
And we've got to where we needed to go.
Mm-hmm.
But back in the day in Ontario, where you're limited by daylight hours, you really have no wiggle room. And so when people do ask us about our safety record, I think all of these things do play a role, and we're just super proud of it.
That's all, and you should keep it up, because there's no sense in selling something like that.
Even capsizing canoes. So, for example, this summer, we had about 180 days of river travel, all of our trips combined.
Yeah,
we had 3 canoes tipped.
Nice,
and
that's very low.
We're proud of that. That's manageable. And no consequence. And for us, if there were no canoes flip, it would have been a perfect summer. But it's not perfect on the water. These rapids are challenging, and we do have some rookie paddlers, and you can make a misjudgment and a misstep. And sometimes the river can reach up and grab you, and it's never where you think it's going to grab you. It's always not in the big rapids, but in the converging currents.
If you just hit the bow of your boat off a rock at the wrong angle in the wrong water,
yep,
it's over. You're over.
You can lose your balance and off you go. So, it's not a big setback, but we know of other operators where there could be dozens of canoes tipping in a summer, a lot of gear and people in the water, and that we think is unacceptable. So we have really made a commitment to.
I think it depends. Travel. It depends on the context. Like
Sure. Oh,
we,
sure. Sure.
like for us, we would, I don't know, we probably have dozens in the summer. Obviously scale is different, but we would encourage kids to, like, you want them to understand that if they make a mistake like that, like it's going to be okay and we're going to save
Right.
them. So like there's a certain level of like, you know what, maybe you should hit the big wave and see what happens. I wanted to tell you
Fair
about,
enough.
we
Yeah.
were doing a throw bag rescue training. And this is just because you were talking about, missing your judgment or whatnot. And I had one of the kids go up and get in the wave train.
Sure.
And I threw it, and I think what happened, I thought I like threw it in front of him. And it just went down river. So I thought I had missed. And I turned around to the kids and I said, when you don't miss and they grab it, it's actually a whole lot of force. And I was still holding onto the rope. And what had happened is I had thrown it into the far eddy and I didn't notice.
Oh,
So the rope
sorry.
the rope just sat there and uncoiled in this big loop. So he caught it. And literally, as I was saying, when they grab it, it really gives you a yank. I was still, yeah, it took me like 15 feet. And it was just one of those perfect moments of like, yep, I should have been paying more attention.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And tell me more about kind of like, you've been using, kind of extending your season at the lodge, and how's that been going?
Well, we built the lodge in 2009, and we needed a home base.
Mm-hmm.
We were under pressure to grow our capacity a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
There was a little bit more momentum in our tourism sector, and we just felt we needed to sink roots down into the community, invest in the community. And so we built the lodge in 2009 with a bunch of teenage boys and a couple of 20-year-olds who knew how to do a saddle notch. And we brought logs from Ontario. We combed logs off the Mackenzie River and threw up this log shell. And by the time we had it operational in 2010, and our season would end around the 20th or 24th of August, we would just close the door and go home. And we always felt that the building was underutilized,
Mm-hmm.
and that really we needed to diversify the usage of that building a little bit more. And so in the last 10 years, we've had hikers stay with us. We've had tourists stay with us at the lodge. We operate it as a B&B. It's comfortable. It's rustic. It's not 5-star, but it's super exciting place to be. It's right at the North Right float base. So there's aircraft landing and taking off. There's action at the base. It's very, very comfortable. There's great outdoor space. And more recently, we've had some government groups stay with us. We've had geologists stay with us, engineers stay with us. And recently, some of the hunt outfitter camps asked if we might stay into September and take care of some of their hunters. And this there's no reason why we couldn't. Our building's not winterized, so being here to the end of September is not really unthinkable. So for the last 2 years, we've been working with several of the hunt camps and accommodating hunters, some of the guides, and it's worked out extremely well. Of course, they're right at the float base, which is very
Couldn't
convenient.
be more convenient.
Oh, it's just fantastic. And what we have found is that it doesn't matter if the hunters are from a couple of different camps.
Mm-hmm.
They all jump into the conversation.
I'm sure.
They're great storytellers. And some of them sound larger than life. However, they're very passionate and they're infused with this love of the wilderness. And so we can comfortably sit 12 around our dining room table, and to listen into those conversations has been a real eye opener. It's really been very, very enjoyable, and we'll continue now to work with the hunting outfitters into September as we go forward, and we'll just find what we need to take care of their requirements. So, for example, this year we've been running hunters into ENR for export permitting, take them up to Canadian North Cargo for exporting, shipping. No, it's just worked out really, really well, and we're generating revenue from a different source to accommodate some of these unbelievable costs we have now with freight and not being able to use the river barge. It's very challenging, as you know, being a northerner, to operate in this community in the Sawtoo and face these incredible transportation charges. So we really do need to, in order to stabilize the company, diversification is key.
Mm-hmm. So how do you view your role, over the next 5 years? Do you feel like you're going to kind of hold space at base, more?
I think what I'd like to do is I like your description, hold space at the base, but also maybe be selective about going on a few marquee trips that are within my wheelhouse. Like we have a group of friends who are interested in coming with us on the Horton River next year, a section of river that Lynn has never been on, and I'd love to take her on the Upper Horton River. She's having knee surgery this fall, so hopefully by next summer she'll be confident to be in a canoe. But I think my role is going to be more managerial and sort of behind the scenes, and a little bit as host and storyteller, putting out fires. I know that, literally and figuratively. So, for example, we were here for 3 weeks before our first guests arrived in June. And the very first group of guests to arrive, our sewage line blew up. And we had a bit of raw sewage on our driveway.
That's always nice.
Oh, it was classic. And,
couldn't happen 5 days earlier.
No, my young staff were all worried and anxious. And I said, guys, like running a small operation like Canoe North Adventures, it's just going from crisis to crisis and putting out each one accordingly and getting on with your day. You can't let these things throw you off. You just have to get on with your day. So
that's very cool. Well, it's been a pleasure to sit down with you, Al, and hear more about kind of your philosophy and where it all came from. And it was interesting kind of leaving the summer camp world and then coming up here and then buying a house in DOT and being like, oh, there's like a little bit of what's so familiar right down the road. So
lots of common ground there. And I think the important thing is just like the foundational DNA. It's in our bones to be in canoes and to be out in the wilderness. And we've been lucky to develop this into, a lifestyle. And we're very proud of our legacy. We're super proud to be part of this community and find ways to integrate into the community. And my son Taylor is very committed to the future of Canoe North in Norman Wells and in the Sawtoo. He has deep emotional roots here. He learned to do his guiding in this community as a teenager on these rivers. And it's interesting. He spent the last 3 summers in the date show setting up our Nahanni operation. This year he came back to the Sawtoo and he said, Dad, Mom, I think we need to limit what we do in the date show and make sure that our operation in the Sawtoo is our primary source of inspiration for future adventures. So I was excited to hear that.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on.
Okay, Josh. Thanks, dude.